Late November 1992, Chicago. The Metro, a club on North Clark Street that smelled like stale beer and ambition. The kind of place where bands went to prove themselves before they became something bigger or disappeared trying. Nirvana had just played the Aragon Ballroom the night before. Sold out. 3,000 people screaming every word to songs that were barely a year old. Kurt Cobain was exhausted, hollowed out from the tour, from the fame that came too fast, from being called the voice of a generation when all he wanted was to play his guitar and be left alone. But someone convinced him to stop by the Metro that night. Soundgarden was playing. Chris Cornell was a friend, or close to it, the kind of person Kurt could stand to be around without feeling like he had to perform. The club was packed, maybe 400 people pressed against each other in the dark. Kurt came in through the back, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days, his blonde hair unwashed and falling into his eyes. Nobody recognized him at first. He looked like any other kid in flannel who'd wandered in from the street. Billy Corgan was there too. The Smashing Pumpkins were between tours, working on what would become their second album. Billy had been living in the studio for months, obsessing over every guitar layer, every string arrangement, building something massive and complex. He was 25 years old and completely sure of himself. He knew exactly what he wanted Smashing Pumpkins to be. Sophisticated, layered, technically impressive. The opposite of what grunge was becoming. Billy saw Kurt near the bar and walked over. They'd met before, briefly, at some industry thing neither of them wanted to attend. There was never any warmth between them. They were too different, wanted two different things from music. "Kurt," Billy said, extending his hand. Kurt shook it, said nothing. "Hell of a show last night," Billy continued. "Aragon was packed." "Yeah. Must be nice," Billy said, and there was an edge in his voice. Not quite hostile, but not friendly either. "Playing three chords and having everyone treat you like you invented music." Kurt looked at him, didn't respond right away. Just looked. The noise of the club continued around them. Soundgarden was setting up on stage, tuning, adjusting amps. Chris Cornell's voice could be heard doing sound checks somewhere in the distance. "I didn't mean that as an insult," Billy said, though clearly he did. "It's just, some of us are trying to push music forward. Complex arrangements, layered production, real musicianship. And then there's grunge, which is basically just punk rock played slower." Kurt took a sip of his beer, still didn't say anything. "Nevermind is a great record," Billy went on, unable to stop himself now. "Don't get me wrong, but it's simple. It's effective because it's simple. Anyone could have written those songs if they'd thought of it first." "Maybe," Kurt said quietly. Billy hadn't expected agreement. He'd expected Kurt to defend himself, to argue. The lack of resistance was somehow more irritating than a fight would have been. "The difference," Billy said, leaning in slightly, "is that what we're doing with Pumpkins requires actual skill. Musical knowledge. We're not just bashing out power chords and calling it a revolution." Kurt nodded slowly. Set his beer down on the bar. "You play guitar, right?" Kurt asked. "Yeah. Classically trained, actually, since I was 12. "That's good," Kurt said. "That's really good." Something in Kurt's tone made Billy pause. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't defensive. It was just quiet and genuine, which was somehow worse. Someone from Soundgarden's crew came over and asked Kurt if he wanted to come backstage. Kurt said sure, and Billy followed, uninvited but unchallenged. Backstage at the Metro wasn't glamorous. A concrete room with exposed pipes, cases of equipment stacked against walls, a couch that had absorbed decades of spills. Chris Cornell was there, drinking water, preparing mentally for the set. A few other musicians Kurt knew were hanging around. There was an acoustic guitar in the corner. A beaten-up Stella probably belonged to someone in Soundgarden's crew. It was sitting there unplayed, slightly out of tune. Kurt picked it up. Nobody asked him to. Nobody suggested it. He just walked over and picked it up like it was the most natural thing in the world. He sat down on the couch and started tuning it by ear. The room didn't go silent exactly, but conversations got quieter. People were aware that something was happening, even if they didn't know what yet. Billy stood near the door, arms crossed, watching with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Kurt finished tuning, strummed once. The guitar sounded thin, cheap, not like the instrument could produce anything beautiful. Then he started playing. The song was all apologies. It wouldn't be released for another 8 months. Wouldn't appear on In Utero until September 1993. Nobody in that room had heard it before. Kurt's fingers moved across the strings with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything people thought they knew about him. The chord progression was simple, deceptively simple, but the way he played it, the way he let certain notes ring while damping others, created a texture that was both sparse and somehow full. Then he started singing. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. Not the raw scream people knew from Smells Like Teen Spirit or Territorial Pissings. This was something else entirely, something naked and undefended. What else should I be? All apologies. What else should I say? Everyone is gay. The lyrics were strange, deliberately obtuse in a way that somehow made them more honest. They didn't explain themselves. They just existed, vulnerable and resigned. Billy Corgan, standing by the door, felt something shift inside his chest. He'd spent months in the studio layering guitars, building walls of sound, constructing something technically impressive. And here was Kurt, playing 3 chords on a cheap acoustic guitar in a concrete room, creating something more emotionally devastating than anything Billy had ever written. The room had gone completely silent now. Chris Cornell had stopped whatever he was doing and was just listening. The crew members had put down their equipment. Everyone was watching Kurt's hands, listening to his voice, witnessing something that felt private even though they were all there. Kurt sang the chorus. I'll take all the blame. Aqua seafoam shame. Sunburn freezer burn, choking on the ashes of her enemy. The words didn't make literal sense, but they made emotional sense. They communicated something true about guilt and inadequacy and the weight of being seen, of being judged, of never feeling quite right in your own skin. Billy realized his arms had uncrossed. He was leaning forward slightly, his entire body oriented toward Kurt and that cheap guitar. The bridge came. In the sun I feel as one. Married, buried. Kurt's voice cracked slightly on buried, not from lack of control, but from honesty. He was singing about death, about wanting to disappear, about the relief of not having to perform anymore. And he was doing it in a room full of people who'd spent their lives performing. The song ended with Kurt repeating, "All in all is all we are," over and over, each repetition softer than the last, until finally his fingers stopped moving and the last note faded into the concrete and pipes. Silence. Not the awkward silence of not knowing how to respond. The sacred silence of having witnessed something you know you'll never see again. Chris Cornell broke it first. Jesus, Kurt. Kurt set the guitar down, looked up like he'd forgotten other people were there. Billy Corgan couldn't speak. His mind was racing, rewiring itself. Everything he thought he understood about songwriting was being questioned. He'd been so sure that complexity equaled depth, that technical skill equaled emotional impact, and Kurt had just destroyed that assumption with 3 chords and total honesty. Someone asked Kurt about the song, where it came from. Kurt shrugged. Just something I've been working on, he said. Probably won't make the album. Too simple. Billy finally found his voice. That was... He stopped, started again. That was the most honest thing I've ever heard. Kurt looked at him, surprised. I was wrong, Billy said quietly. Earlier, what I said about 3 chords, I was wrong. Kurt didn't say, I told you so. Didn't gloat. Just nodded like he understood that Billy needed to say it. The thing is, Billy continued, talking more to himself than anyone else, I've been so focused on being impressive that I forgot about being honest. I've been building these massive arrangements because I thought that's what made music matter. But you just, he gestured helplessly at the guitar, you just showed me that none of that matters if you're not saying something true. Kurt picked at a loose thread on his cardigan. Your music's good, man. You're doing your thing. This is just my thing. No, Billy said firmly. Your thing is the thing. This is what music is supposed to do. Make people feel something real. I've been so busy trying to be clever that I forgot about that. The conversation moved on. Soundgarden went on stage and played, and the night continued like nights do. But something had changed in Billy Corgan's internal landscape. 2 weeks later, Billy went back into the studio to continue work on Siamese Dream. But his approach was different. He started stripping things away instead of adding them. He focused on emotional honesty instead of technical impressiveness. The album that emerged was still layered, still complex, but underneath all of that was something raw and vulnerable that hadn't been there before. In a 1994 interview with Spin magazine, Billy was asked about the difference between Gish and Siamese Dream. He paused for a long time before answering. "I saw Kurt Cobain play an acoustic guitar in a backstage room in Chicago," he finally said. "It changed how I think about songwriting, changed what I think matters." The interviewer asked him to elaborate. "I'd been operating under the assumption that complexity was depth," Billy explained, "that if you made something technically impressive, you'd made something meaningful. And then I heard Kurt play 3 chords with complete honesty, and I realized I'd been wrong about everything." The depth isn't in the number of chords or the production tricks. The depth is in whether you're telling the truth about what it feels like to be alive. When Siamese Dream was released in July 1993, critics noted a new vulnerability in Billy's songwriting. Songs like Disarm and Mayonnaise were simpler structurally than anything on Gish, but emotionally more complex. The album sold millions, but more importantly, it connected with people in a way the first album hadn't. Billy sent Kurt a copy with a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me what matters. This album exists because of that night in Chicago." Kurt never responded. He was dealing with his own demons by then, lost in addiction and depression, and the weight of fame he never wanted. But people close to him said he kept Billy's note, that it meant something to him. When Kurt died in April 1994, Billy was devastated. Not because they were close friends, they weren't, but because Kurt had shown him something essential about music and about himself, and now that person was gone. At a Smashing Pumpkins show shortly after Kurt's death, Billy dedicated Disarm to him. Before playing it, he told the audience, "This song exists because Kurt Cobain taught me that honesty matters more than impressiveness. That 3 chords played with your whole heart is worth more than 1,000 chords played to show off." Years later, in a 2005 interview, Billy was asked about his relationship with Kurt. "We weren't friends," Billy said. "I was kind of a dick to him, actually. Told him his music was too simple, that anyone could have written those songs. And he didn't argue with me. He just picked up a guitar and played something so honest and beautiful that it made me question everything I thought I knew about music." "Do you still think about that night?" the interviewer asked. "All the time," Billy said. "Every time I write a song, I think about Kurt sitting on that couch in Chicago, playing 3 chords and telling the truth. It reminds me that the point isn't to be impressive, the point is to be real." The story of that night in Chicago became something of a legend in music circles. People who were there told it to people who weren't. It got embellished, details changed, but the core remained the same. Billy Corgan challenged Kurt Cobain's simplicity, and Kurt responded by playing something so emotionally honest that it changed Billy's entire approach to music. It's a story about ego and humility, about the difference between skill and truth, about how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to be impressive and just be honest. Billy Corgan went on to have a long, successful career. He's still making music, still pushing himself, still trying to create something meaningful. But he's said multiple times that everything he's done since 1992 has been influenced by those 3 minutes in Chicago when Kurt Cobain showed him what music could be when you stripped away everything except the truth. Kurt never knew the impact he had that night. He played a song on a cheap guitar in a concrete room and then went back to his hotel, probably forgot about it by morning. That was how Kurt operated. He didn't try to teach lessons or change minds. He just played what he felt and let people take from it what they needed. But for Billy Corgan, and for everyone else in that room, those 3 minutes were revelatory. They witnessed simplicity becoming profound, honesty becoming powerful, 3 chords becoming everything that matters about music. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth matters more than impressiveness, that vulnerability is strength, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop performing and just be real, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever had a moment where someone showed you what really matters? Let us know in the comments. And remember, it's not about how many chords you play, it's about whether you're telling the truth.